1. I should start off by saying this is a story not about me but of my mother. And if I remember correctly, my mom was around 9 at the time of this story. So it was only my mom and her 3 older sisters home at the time. Their ages were 9, 10, 12, and 15, with my mom being the youngest. My grandparents were out of town and wouldn't be back till later that night, leaving the oldest sister to watch the younger ones. The 2 younger sisters, my mom and my Aunt Alicia, were outside playing and doing whatever little girls at the age of 9 and 10 did back then, when they noticed this man standing across the street from them and just watching them. My mom said they thought it was weird but didn't think too much of it, and continued to play, and eventually the guy walked off. Around 30 minutes went by, and they completely forgot about the guy, until the next thing they knew the guy was walking up in the yard towards them. They both completely froze and just stared at him as he approached. She said she was completely full of fear as he was closing in, but they were too scared to even move. Then he just stopped about 5 feet from them. She said there was a short pause as the guy just stared at them, but it felt like an eternity. The guy stared directly into my mom's eyes and said, "I'll be back." Then he just turned around and walked off. Soon as the guy rounded the corner, my mom and her sister ran to the back door, trying to get in, but it was locked. My mom's 2 oldest sisters tended to pick on the young ones quite a bit, and locking them out is a thing they did regularly. But as my mom and her sister pounded on the door and were screaming and pleading to be let in, their sisters could tell something was wrong and let them in almost immediately. They told the 2 oldest what happened, and not even a minute later, they heard someone pounding on their patio door demanding to be let in. All 4 sisters looked over and saw the man right outside the door, pulling and banging on it and yelling to be let inside. They all ran to the back of the house and locked themselves in the back room, where they called 911. Then, after dialing the police, they called the neighbor who lived 2 houses down. But by the time the police and neighbor got there, the guy was already gone. After all was said and done, my grandparents were called and told what happened. They were visiting family in the next town over, and immediately came home. After my grandpa borrowed his father's shotgun, of course, just in case the guy decided to come back. But luckily for him, he never did, and that was the last they heard of him. 2. My neighborhood has a pretty dark history. I have piles of stories I could share about the horrific crimes that have happened here, but there is one in particular that intrigues me the most and is probably the most famous and most gruesome story of murder that has happened in my neighborhood of Silver Springs, Maryland. If anyone's interested, I can provide articles and mugshots during this event. Okay, here we go. The Great Depression caused a major rise in the number of gang activity in the area. Many of these gangs would only rob people, but there was one known gang comprised of 3 local residents that committed a heinous murder. The gangsters had actually met each other in prison. One of these killers actually lived in the oldest house in my neighborhood, standing tall since the 1800s. I can literally see the house from mine, so it's pretty gnarly to find out the dark past of a neighbor's home. This trio consisted of Joseph Kirby, William Reed, and Lawrence Gingle. They were all in their early 20s. Kirby was the perpetrator, who lived in the house I just mentioned. Through this series of events, be warned that the murder of their victim was horrid. A well-liked 65-year-old farmer named Elwood Matthews was walking back home after he grabbed some things from the local supermarket. His brother lived with Elwood and was worried when Elwood didn't return. 2 days went by, and there was still no sign of him. The authorities and community got involved in trying to find their beloved farmer. Well, it wasn't the police, but a group of Boy Scouts who came upon the dead body of Elwood Matthews. The placement of his corpse is actually a place that I frequently fish at. Creepy. So what happened? Apparently the gangster trio spotted Elwood walking in town, and William Reed recognized him as the man who got his brother sent to prison. He wanted revenge. One by one, each murderer was caught. This is a quote provided from a Silver Spring archive and a website dedicated to our neighborhood. So this is their credit. The Washington Post headline stated, Kirby's confession stated, "On our way home we passed Four Corners, and Reed said, 'There's old man Matthews. He always has plenty of money and he's the bastard to send my brother to jail. I'll get even with him.'" Once again, Kirby recounts, "Reed told me to hold the man up. We hid by the side of the road until the old man came by, and I stuck a .32 caliber gun in him. He screamed and threw some money on the road. Reed came up behind and hit him over the head with a Mauser revolver, knocking him down. We dragged the old man almost 2 miles through the woods. Reed said we were right near the Matthews farm until we got to the creek. Gingle took the old man's suspenders and tied a rock around his neck with it, and then Reed threw him in the water." How awful is that, to be strangled by your own clothing? Kirby continued, "The suspenders broke and the old man came to the surface screaming, 'Someone please help me. I'll save you, you bastard, you sent my brother to jail.' Reed shouted and fired 2 shots at Matthews. Kirby's confession continued, "He sank out of sight and didn't come up anymore. We threw him in the water below the dam near a big rock." So once again, after a week-long manhunt, all 3 men were caught and confessed to the murder, on top of another murder in West Virginia. These assholes actually dragged this poor man through the trails I am always around. You'd think 2 of my favorite places were areas of this crime. The gangster trios were sent to prison. The shooter, who was William Reed, was hanged. The other 2 were given life sentences. However, Gingle was paroled and died in 1981 at his home in motherfucking Silver Spring. Dude had the nerve to come back. Fucking asshole. When I walk by that house, those fishing spots, and my favorite trail, I can't help but think of this man. Rest in peace, Elwood Matthews, beloved farmer of Four Corners. 3. In 2013, I lived alone in an apartment and started dabbling into meditation for the first time. I did no research, just started googling shit and found a meditation that specifically was used to open your third eye. I thought, sweet, sounds fun. Looking back, fun was about as opposite of a word to describe the events that transpired from there as you could get. Well, be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. I was using binaural beats to do this meditation. For those of you who aren't aware of these, it basically consists of 2 alternating tones and you listen through headphones for full benefit. I had been meditating for about a week, when things got really strange really quickly. There were so many individual creepy moments, it's hard to condense it all into one story. Everything from blowing light bulbs constantly, to having otherworldly screams coming through my computer speaker as I Skyped with a friend, to feeling things around me and not wanting to sleep, because a few times I woke up with dried blood on me. Enough for me to sound batshit crazy, and have my family and friends question my own sanity. Backing up a bit. I've done research since, and realize I think I induced what is referred to as a Kundalini awakening during that time. Now I will get to the thing that happened during that time I felt was very significant, and has not left my mind since. I was having very vivid dreams, which I always had, but seemed to increase a lot around then. In my dream I see my friend who has passed on already. He was a childhood crush, puppy love. You know, the first person you remember just making your heart race so hard it felt like a panic attack. He was killed in 2003 by so-called friends. He was only 20 years old at the time. It was awful. It was gruesome. And when I think about it to this day, I cry every single time. That is why I won't go into detail on that part of the story. There's losing someone, then losing someone to a murder. It was the kind of thing that you never forget and changes you forever. so I had dreams of him throughout the years. It would be me talking to him, but not him saying anything back. It'd be me telling him it was too bad he had to die and he was a good person. Looking back, I think those were ways for me to deal with this subconsciously, as I myself was a teenager when it happened, and found drugs as a great way to deal with it at the time. But once I started meditating, my dreams seemed to have much more significance. Okay, now for the best part of this story. In my dream I see him, but for the first time in any dream I am able to hug him, and he talks back to me. It was such an amazing feeling. I kissed his neck, and there was a tattoo right where I kissed. A tattoo he never had in real life. It was a symbol. After I kissed his neck, he said he would be right back and walked away. It felt so real, and it felt like the closest thing to closure I'd ever receive. Fast forward a week or so, and I'm at work and a guy walks in with an identical tattoo on his neck, in the same spot as my friend in the dream. I stop in my tracks as I see this, and I'm in disbelief. I immediately go up to him and say, "Excuse me, what does your tattoo mean? I really like it." He says it's the sign of Gemini. I think, I wonder why he'd have that tattoo in my dream, as he was never a Gemini. One day I get to Googling and realize that sign of Gemini is ridiculously close to the pi sign, the good old math symbol of an infinite number. You may see where I'm headed with this. I have now come to the conclusion that it was supposed to be a pi sign in the dream, not the Gemini symbol, which raised so many other questions from there. Like, what is the meaning of it? Here's my analysis of the dream. I believe that we associate science and spirituality as two totally different things, when it is all one in the same. I am also a Mandela effect person, who thinks this may be more of a simulation of sorts. Whatever this is, I don't believe we have been given enough to figure it all out. That kinda takes away purpose. If we knew exactly what we were doing here, would we want to be here? If you knew this was not all nearly as real as it felt, how deep down the rabbit hole would you venture? The pi sign is infinite, as are we. I think that was the message I was given. I don't think it's a coincidence that it deals with a circle. This is a loop. There is no ending to your existence. P.S. I would dream about him at least once a year, every year after he passed. But after that last dream, I have not seen him in any dream since. It was as if I received a huge insight of this reality, and he no longer needs to come back to check on me. So until we meet again. 4. When I was around 4 years old, something weird happened. I sleep in my grandparents' bedroom since I am still too scared to sleep in another room. One night, it was time for bed, around 11 p.m. I know, pretty late, but it was a Saturday night, so we watched a lot of Disney movies and played a lot of board games. Anyways, my grandma closed the lights and lay beside me. We prayed together and she sung me a funny lullaby. I laughed at it as she continued to sing. The door then opened and it was my grandpa. My grandpa said something like, "I have the photos in the computer, come take a look." I got nervous hearing that. Now back then I was very scared of the dark. I begged for a nightlight once, but my grandma refused since she's very religious and doesn't believe in ghosts. My grandma got out of bed. I quickly sat up and asked if I can come with them. My grandma said, "No, it's extremely late and you need to go to sleep." Me being the good child I was, I followed her orders and just lay down on the bed. My grandparents then exited the room. It was pitch black, no moonlight since we have thick curtains. Of course I couldn't sleep. My mind was too fixated with monsters and ghosts lurking in the dark. I then tried to just remember some old memories. I was getting a hang of it when suddenly I heard something that made my blood run cold. I heard breathing. Was that breathing? I can clearly hear the thoughts in my head. No, it can't be, I said to myself. I listened for it again, and it was getting louder. I got really scared now, and wanted to go outside, but I was scared that my grandma might get angry, so I lay there. Maybe it was my breathing, I said as I held my breath. It was still there. There was still breathing. I tried to find a logical explanation for it. I looked at my right and looked up at the exhaust fan. Maybe it was from my sister's bedroom. Maybe it's her, I said, but it was too loud to be from her. I listened intently this time and realized that it was actually coming from the end of the bed. I was tearing up now, thinking I was about to die. It got even more louder when I decided that I can't take it anymore. I quickly ran for the door and quickly but quietly opened it. I peeked and saw my grandparents talking and looking at photos. So I got out of the room and tiptoed towards the bathroom. I went inside and opened the lights. I sat down and cried. I was just so scared. I listened and waited for them to stop looking at the photos and go to bed. Eventually I heard them talking more, and hearing the window shut down sound, I then flushed the toilet, pretending that I just got there. They saw me, and they were surprised, but they weren't mad. I guess they bought it. Once when we got in the bedroom, they opened the lights and listened, and there was nothing. I went to the bed and looked at the end of the bed. There was nothing. Exhausted from crying, I lay down and quickly fell asleep. 5. When I was 13, there was a speech contest at school. Being the typical 13-year-old growing up in a family that lived unexplained events, I wanted to explain it. So I did a speech on ESP. My opening line was along the lines of how some people can predict natural weather disasters, such as floods, tornadoes, and hurricanes. I went further to explain that the floods could wipe out bridges, the tornadoes could take down buildings, and the hurricanes could wipe out whole towns or cities. My speech went well. So well, I won first place in the whole school. Which meant I told my story twice, first to my class, then later to the whole school auditorium. A few weeks later, one of my classmates approached me with 2 other boys. He says, "I know you're psychic." I looked at him and laughed. Delighted and exhilarated, and I denied it. Those ground-in family rules kept me from proclaiming anything. He's so excited and begins to explain his theory. "You predicted future events in your speech. The whole school was listening. Am I the only one who's brought this to your attention?" I chuckled out a yes, even though I watched the news and already knew he was right. I chalked it up to be ironic and coincidental, even though my father was going through his synchronicity stage. "There's no such thing as coincidence," I remember him exclaiming. My classmate had observed correctly. I was giddy and trying to hide my excitement, thinking I'd better get to class when he says, "Prove it to my friends." I know my face must have shown shock and annoyance. "Really? I don't have time for this. I've got to get to class." He begins to beg, "Please prove it to my friends." I ask, "How am I supposed to do that?" exasperated. "Guess his locker combination." He points at one of his friends. I laugh. I can't guess 3 numbers. But he continues to beg. Annoyed, I ask, "What's the middle number?" He looks at his friend. "Well?" His friend looks at him and replies, 12. I look at the 3 boys and say the first number is 36 and the last number is 24. The boy who just gave me part of his locker combination's mouth fell open. Me, as well as the other boys, were looking at him. "Well?" says his friend. "That's correct." His eyes as big as saucers. We went our separate ways to class, and those boys never bothered me again. Oddly. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here. And thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 45. Thanks very much to everybody who sent stories in for this video. It is very much appreciated. If you have a story you would like to send in, then please send it to kingofthecities at either Google Mail or gmail.com. The link is in the description of every video, and it should also be available on screen right now. If you do happen to send me a story in, I can't promise exactly when the story is going to be used. Sometimes it could be within a few days, other times it could be within a few months, and if it is months, I do apologise for that. But oftentimes it's a matter of just finding the right place for the story